The children remember everything. These 5 words, spoken by 11-year-old Sarah Chen in perfect English to a room full of adults who thought she spoke only Chinese, would unravel the darkest secrets of Boston's Chinatown and cost her everything she held dear. Dr. Marcus Whitmore, the city's most celebrated physician and champion of immigrant rights, stood frozen as the small girl continued speaking. Dr. Whitmore kills the sick babies. The ones with twisted faces. He tells the mothers they died natural, but he puts pillows over their heads because he says they make the other families not want to come to his hospital. The charitable clinic fell silent except for the tick of the grandfather clock that Dr. Whitmore had imported from London. The man who had dedicated his life to treating Boston's poorest immigrants, who had been featured in the Boston Globe as the angel of the excluded, had just been accused of infanticide by a child who supposedly didn't understand English well enough to attend public school. What none of the adults in that room knew was that Sarah Chen possessed a memory so precise and comprehensive that she could recall entire conversations word for word years after hearing them. What they were about to discover was that some memories are too dangerous to possess, and that the most trusted members of society often have the most to hide. Before we continue with Sarah's story and the deadly knowledge that made her the most hunted child in Boston, you should know that the patient records from Whitmore's free clinic for new Americans were destroyed in a suspicious fire exactly 3 days after Sarah's death. The official cause was listed as faulty electrical wiring, but investigators found traces of kerosene-soaked rags hidden behind the basement water heater. Some secrets, it seemed, were worth burning down everything to protect. Boston's Chinatown in 1889 occupied a cramped triangle of streets between Beach Street and the harbor, where nearly 2,000 Chinese immigrants lived in conditions that would shock modern observers. Most had arrived as laborers for the Transcontinental Railroad, only to find themselves stranded on the East Coast when the work ended and anti-Chinese sentiment made westward travel impossible. They created a tight-knit community that served as both sanctuary and prison, bound together by language, customs, and the shared experience of being unwelcome in their adopted country. The neighborhood pulsed with the rhythms of survival. Laundries operated from dawn to midnight, their steamy windows glowing like lanterns in the narrow alleys. Herb shops displayed mysterious roots and powders that promised to cure ailments American doctors couldn't understand. Boarding houses packed 20 men to a room, their occupants sending every spare penny back to families in Guangdong province who depended on American gold for survival. At the heart of this community stood an unlikely figure, Dr. Marcus Whitmore, a Harvard-educated physician who had shocked Boston society by establishing a free medical clinic specifically for Chinese immigrants. While his peers at Massachusetts General Hospital treated Chinese patients with barely concealed contempt, Dr. Whitmore had learned Cantonese, studied traditional Chinese medicine, and dedicated his considerable skills to serving people others considered beneath notice. His clinic, housed in a converted textile warehouse on Hudson Street, treated everything from industrial accidents to childhood diseases. More importantly, it provided services that Chinese women desperately needed but couldn't find elsewhere. Obstetric care, pediatric treatment, and gynecological services that respected their cultural modesty requirements. Dr. Whitmore's reputation among Boston's Chinese community bordered on reverence. He was called Sai Yi, the Western doctor who understood Eastern ways. Mothers brought their sick children to him with confidence that transcended language barriers. Young wives sought his help with difficult pregnancies, knowing he would treat them with dignity rather than the crude indifference they encountered at other medical facilities. The doctor's dedication seemed limitless. He worked 18-hour days, accepted payment in food or labor when families couldn't afford cash, and had been known to perform emergency surgery on his kitchen table when the clinic was too crowded. What made Dr. Whitmore's service even more remarkable was his solution to the persistent language barrier that plagued medical care for Chinese patients. Most physicians in Boston communicated with Chinese patients through crude gestures and broken phrases, leading to dangerous misunderstandings and inadequate treatment. Dr. Whitmore, however, had discovered an extraordinary resource in the Chen family, recent immigrants from a village near Canton who had settled in a cramped apartment above a noodle shop on Beach Street. Li Wei Chen worked 14 hours a day in a commercial street garment factory, while his wife Mei Ling took in piecework sewing to supplement their meager income. Their daughter Sarah, who had arrived in Boston at age 8, possessed what Dr. Whitmore considered the most remarkable linguistic abilities he had ever encountered. Within 6 months of her arrival, Sarah spoke English with the precision of a Boston Brahmin, effortlessly translating between Cantonese, Mandarin, and English with accuracy that impressed even educated Chinese merchants. More importantly, she could translate medical terminology with sophistication that seemed impossible for someone her age. Dr. Whitmore had approached Li Wei Chen in the spring of 1888 with a proposition that would change their lives forever. Would they allow young Sarah to serve as a medical interpreter at his clinic? The work would pay $2 per week, a substantial sum for a struggling immigrant family, and would be performed under strict supervision in a medical environment dedicated to helping their community. Li Wei, who revered education and saw his daughter's linguistic gifts as divine blessing, enthusiastically agreed. He viewed Sarah's work as both financially necessary and socially important, a way for their family to contribute to the welfare of their fellow immigrants. Sarah began her duties in June 1888, working every Tuesday and Thursday evening, plus Saturday mornings when the clinic saw its heaviest patient load. She would sit in a small wooden chair beside Dr. Whitmore's examination table, translating symptoms, medical instructions, and treatment explanations with remarkable precision. Patients trusted her completely, often sharing intimate details about their conditions that they would never have revealed to a male doctor without proper translation. Dr. Whitmore insisted on absolute confidentiality, repeatedly emphasizing that medical information must never be discussed outside the clinic. Sarah was to translate faithfully and immediately forget what she had heard. The private medical concerns of patients, he explained, belonged to God and science alone. The arrangement worked smoothly for over a year. Sarah faithfully translated the typical catalog of immigrant medical problems: industrial injuries from dangerous factory work, respiratory ailments from overcrowded living conditions, nutritional deficiencies from inadequate diets, and childhood diseases that spread rapidly through tenement buildings. Dr. Whitmore would diagnose conditions, prescribe treatments, and explain medical procedures through Sarah's precise translations. The system seemed to serve everyone's needs perfectly. But Sarah Chen possessed a memory that functioned like a phonograph, recording every conversation with perfect fidelity and playing back details with startling accuracy. While she never spoke of what she heard in the clinic, her mind retained every patient encounter, every diagnosis, every treatment decision, and every private conversation between Dr. Whitmore and his colleagues. Names, dates, medical details, and personal secrets accumulated in her young memory like artifacts in a museum, carefully preserved and perfectly organized. The first crack in Sarah's carefully maintained silence appeared on a cold November evening in 1889. She had just finished translating for a particularly difficult patient session involving a woman who had lost her newborn baby, and was walking home through the gaslit streets of Chinatown when she encountered Mrs. Wang, the wife of the neighborhood's most prosperous herbal medicine dealer. Mrs. Wang was known for her kindness to children and often gave Sarah small candies when she passed their shop on Beach Street. "Little Sarah," Mrs. Wang called out in Cantonese, "how is your family? I haven't seen your mother at the herb market this week." "She's been working extra hours at the factory," Sarah replied, explaining that Mei Ling had taken on additional piecework to help save money for her parents' passage from China. The conversation continued in their native language, as it typically did among neighborhood residents. Mrs. Wang expressed sympathy and offered to send some ginseng tea for Mei Ling's chronic fatigue. "Mrs. Wang," Sarah said suddenly, switching to English as she often did when excited or emotional, "not all doctors really help Chinese babies. Some doctors think Chinese babies are better off dead if they're not perfect. Dr. Whitmore tells mothers their babies died from sickness, but sometimes he helps them die because he thinks they won't have good lives in America." Mrs. Wang looked puzzled and concerned. "What do you mean, child? Dr. Whitmore is a good man. He's helped many families in our community." Sarah's dark eyes took on a distant quality, as if she were seeing through Mrs. Wang rather than at her. "When babies are born with cleft lips or twisted feet or weak hearts, Dr. Whitmore says it's merciful to let them go to heaven instead of letting them suffer in a country that hates Chinese people. He uses a pillow or sometimes just doesn't help them breathe. He tells the mothers it was God's will, but it's really his choice. The mothers cry, but they don't know it wasn't natural." The words hung in the cold November air like visible frost. Mrs. Wang felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She had brought her own grandson to Dr. Whitmore when he was born with a clubfoot, and the doctor had worked for months to correct the condition with special braces and exercises. The idea that this same physician might be deliberately causing the deaths of imperfect newborns seemed impossible to believe. "Sarah," Mrs. Wang said carefully, "those are very serious things to say about Dr. Whitmore. How would you know such terrible things?" Sarah blinked as if awakening from a trance. The distant look in her eyes cleared, replaced by confusion and something resembling fear. "I don't know why I said that. I should go home. Mama will be worried." She hurried away, leaving Mrs. Wang standing alone under a street lamp, her mind racing. Mrs. Wang decided to discuss the incident with her husband, who had known several families that had lost newborns under Dr. Whitmore's care. Chen Ming Wang had operated his herbal medicine shop for 15 years and served as an unofficial community leader and advisor. Families often sought his counsel on matters ranging from business disputes to medical concerns, and he maintained relationships with every significant family in Chinatown. When his wife repeated Sarah's disturbing words, Chen Ming's reaction was unexpected. Instead of dismissing the girl's claims as impossible, he grew very quiet and thoughtful. "What troubles you, husband?" Mrs. Wang asked. Chen Ming was quiet for several minutes, staring at the small shrine to his ancestors that occupied a corner of their shop. Finally, he spoke. 3 months ago, the Zhao family lost their newborn son. The baby was born with a severe cleft palate, and Dr. Whitmore said the condition was too severe to repair. He told them the baby would never be able to eat properly and would face terrible difficulties in American society. The baby died the same night, and Dr. Whitmore said it was a blessing that the child didn't suffer. Mrs. Wang felt her heart racing. "That doesn't prove anything wrong happened, husband. 2 weeks ago, I spoke with Mrs. Zhao about her loss. She told me something that disturbed me. She said that when she arrived at the clinic that morning, she could hear her baby crying strongly from the other room. But when Dr. Whitmore brought the child to her, he was already dead. She said the crying stopped very suddenly, like it was cut off. The implications of Chen Ming's revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. If Dr. Whitmore was indeed making decisions about which imperfect babies should live or die, then Sarah Chen's impossible knowledge might contain terrifying truth. Mrs. Wang spent the following weeks quietly investigating other infant deaths that had occurred under Dr. Whitmore's care. What she discovered deepened her concerns about the doctor's practices and Sarah's dangerous knowledge. Over the past 18 months, 7 babies had died at the clinic under circumstances that, while not suspicious enough to warrant official investigation, formed a disturbing pattern when examined collectively. All 7 babies had been born with significant physical deformities, severe cleft palates, spina bifida, major heart defects, or severe developmental abnormalities. All 7 had died within hours of birth, despite appearing healthy enough to survive with proper care. All 7 families had been told that their children's conditions were incompatible with meaningful life, and that death was a merciful release from inevitable suffering. Most troubling of all 7 families had initially reported hearing their babies cry vigorously immediately after birth, only to be told later that the infants had died from complications related to their deformities. Mrs. Wang's investigation revealed another disturbing pattern. Dr. Whitmore's decisions about which babies to allow to die seemed to correlate with his assessment of their family's social status and economic prospects. Babies born to established merchants or educated immigrants received aggressive treatment and care, regardless of their physical challenges. Babies born to poor laborers or recent immigrants were more likely to be classified as hopeless cases, whose death was described as merciful. The more Mrs. Wang learned, the more convinced she became that Sarah Chen had somehow gained access to information about Dr. Whitmore's eugenic practices. The girl's specific knowledge about methods and motivations suggested that she had overheard conversations that revealed the doctor's true philosophy about treating imperfect Chinese children. Her suspicions were confirmed when she encountered Sarah again outside the clinic on a December evening. The girl was leaving after a particularly long translation session, and she appeared troubled and distracted. "Sarah," Mrs. Wang said gently, "are you feeling well? You look upset." Sarah looked up at her with those disturbing dark eyes that seemed to hold too much knowledge for someone her age. "Mrs. Wang, Dr. Whitmore talks to the other doctors about Chinese babies being different from white babies. He says Chinese families have too many children anyway, and that America doesn't need more Chinese people who can't contribute to society. He says it's scientifically proven that Chinese people with defects should be prevented from reproducing, and that letting defective babies die is actually helping the Chinese race become stronger in America." Mrs. Wang felt sick to her stomach. The implications of Sarah's words went beyond individual cases of infanticide to encompass a systematic program of eugenics targeting their entire community. "Sarah, how do you know what Dr. Whitmore says to other doctors?" "I hear everything, Mrs. Wang. When he talks to Dr. Richardson from Massachusetts General or Dr. Blackwell from the medical school, I'm always there translating, but they forget I understand English. They talk about Chinese people like we're animals that need to be bred properly. Dr. Whitmore says he's doing scientific work to improve public health." The girl walked away, leaving Mrs. Wong with the terrible realization that Sarah Chen was not just witnessing isolated incidents of medical malpractice. She was overhearing conversations that revealed Dr. Whitmore as part of a larger network of physicians implementing eugenic policies against Chinese immigrants. The knowledge she possessed could destroy not only Dr. Whitmore's career, but potentially expose a conspiracy that extended into Boston's most prestigious medical institutions. Mrs. Wong understood that Sarah's knowledge made her extraordinarily dangerous to powerful people who had invested their careers in practices that would horrify the public if exposed. She also understood that an 11-year-old Chinese girl would be an easy target for anyone who wanted to ensure that such explosive secrets remained buried forever. The death of Dr. Whitmore's secret practices began to unravel when Sarah's involuntary revelations started reaching beyond Mrs. Wong's investigation. The girl's psychological condition, which caused her to blurt out medical secrets during casual conversation, was creating ripples of suspicion throughout Chinatown that Dr. Whitmore could not control or contain. The crisis escalated when Sarah encountered Mr. Liu, the community's most respected elder and unofficial leader, outside the clinic on a January evening in 1890. Liu Chenwei had arrived in Boston 25 years earlier as one of the first Chinese immigrants to establish a permanent business in the city. His import shop on Beach Street served as an informal community center, and his opinions carried enormous weight among Chinese families. "Little translator," Mr. Liu said warmly in Cantonese, "you work very hard for our community. Your parents must be proud that you helped Dr. Whitmore care for our people." Sarah looked up at him with that increasingly familiar distant expression. "Mr. Liu, Dr. Whitmore doesn't think our people deserve to live if we're not perfect. He keeps a special medicine that makes babies stop breathing, and he uses it when babies are born with problems. He writes in his records that they died from their birth defects, but really he killed them because he thinks Chinese babies should be perfect or dead." Mr. Liu felt the blood drain from his face. As someone who had spent decades navigating the prejudices and challenges facing Chinese immigrants, he understood the implications of Sarah's words better than most. If Dr. Whitmore was indeed implementing eugenic policies against Chinese children, it represented not just individual crimes, but a systematic assault on their community's future. "Child, these are very serious accusations. How do you know such things?" "I remember everything anyone says in the clinic, Mr. Liu. Dr. Whitmore talks to other doctors about preventing Chinese people from having defective children who will burden American society. He says the babies he helps die are actually better off because America will never accept imperfect Chinese people anyway. He keeps detailed records of which babies he helps die, and he meets with professors from Harvard who study how to improve the Chinese race through selective survival." Mr. Liu realized that Sarah's knowledge extended far beyond isolated incidents to encompass what appeared to be an organized program of eugenic infanticide. Her mention of Harvard professors and detailed records suggested that Dr. Whitmore's activities were part of a larger academic and medical initiative targeting Chinese immigrants. That evening, Mr. Liu convened an emergency meeting of Chinatown's Leadership Council, including the heads of the 6 major family associations, the directors of the 3 largest businesses, and the community's traditional medical practitioners. The group met in the back room of Liu's import shop, behind locked doors and drawn curtains, to discuss the crisis that Sarah Chen's revelations had exposed. The discussion was conducted entirely in Cantonese to ensure complete privacy. Mr. Liu carefully repeated what Sarah had told him, emphasizing both the specificity of her knowledge and the systematic nature of the practices she described. The response from the community leaders was immediate and unanimous. If Sarah's claims were accurate, Dr. Whitmore represented an existential threat to their community that required immediate action. Chen Ming Wang, who had conducted his own investigation into infant deaths at the clinic, shared his findings with the Leadership Council. His research had identified not 7, but 12 suspicious deaths over the past 2 years, all involving babies with birth defects, all occurring under circumstances that suggested deliberate intervention rather than natural causes. Dr. Hu, the community's traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, provided additional context that deepened their concerns. He revealed that Dr. Whitmore had approached him several months earlier about collaborating on a study of birth defects among Chinese children. Dr. Whitmore had expressed interest in traditional Chinese beliefs about infanticide and had asked whether Chinese culture included practices of eliminating imperfect newborns. Dr. Hu had been disturbed by the questions and had declined to participate, but now he understood that Dr. Whitmore had been researching cultural justifications for his own eugenic practices. The Leadership Council faced a dilemma that perfectly illustrated the vulnerability of their community. If they reported their suspicions to Boston police, they would be Chinese immigrants accusing a respected white physician of mass murder based on the testimony of an 11-year-old girl. The likelihood of being believed was virtually zero, and the attempt would probably result in retaliation against their entire community. If they confronted Dr. Whitmore directly, they would reveal that they knew about his crimes, potentially triggering efforts to silence Sarah and anyone else who possessed dangerous knowledge. After hours of discussion, the council reached a consensus that prioritized Sarah's safety above all other considerations. They would quietly remove her from her position at the clinic, relocate her family to New York's Chinatown where they had business connections, and ensure that no record existed of her specific knowledge about Dr. Whitmore's practices. The plan seemed reasonable and protective until they attempted to implement it. When Mr. Liu approached Li Chen about ending Sarah's translation work, the man's reaction was immediate and negative. The $2 per week that Sarah earned represented nearly a third of the family's total income. More importantly, Li Wei viewed his daughter's work as evidence of divine favor and social advancement. His child was working alongside educated American doctors, contributing to the welfare of their community, and developing skills that could lead to a better life in America. Mr. Liu, Li Wei said firmly, Sarah wants to continue helping Dr. Whitmore. This work is important to her education and important to our family's future in America. Li Wei, I'm concerned that the work may be too difficult for someone Sarah's age. Perhaps she could contribute to the community in other ways. What other ways, Mr. Liu? Sarah has a gift for languages that God gave her for a purpose. If the clinic doesn't want her help, perhaps other doctors would welcome her services. I've heard that physicians at Massachusetts General Hospital are also interested in working with Chinese patients. The implicit threat was clear. If the community leaders dismissed Sarah from her position without explanation, Li Wei would likely seek similar work for her with other physicians, potentially expanding her exposure to dangerous medical secrets and increasing the risk to her safety. Mr. Liu realized that protecting Sarah would require delicate maneuvering that balanced her father's ambitions with the community's understanding of the mortal danger she faced. The situation became more complex when Dr. Whitmore himself approached Li Wei with a significant increase in Sarah's compensation and expanded responsibilities. The doctor offered to pay $4 per week for translation services, and suggested that Sarah could also help with medical record-keeping and patient correspondence. Dr. Whitmore praised Sarah's exceptional abilities and suggested that she could have a future in medical translation that would provide substantial income for her family. Li Wei was thrilled by Dr. Whitmore's proposal, seeing it as confirmation that his daughter's talents were being recognized and rewarded by American society. He immediately accepted the enhanced position without consulting the community leaders who were trying to protect his child. The decision meant that Sarah would be spending more time at the clinic, gaining access to even more sensitive information, and becoming increasingly valuable to Dr. Whitmore as both a translator and a potential witness to his activities. Mr. Liu and the Leadership Council realized they were losing control of the situation. Sarah's expanded role at the clinic would give her access to medical records, private consultations, and administrative discussions that could expose the full scope of Dr. Whitmore's eugenic program. At the same time, her increased value to Dr. Whitmore meant that any attempt to remove her from her position would be met with resistance from both the doctor and her own father. The community leaders faced an impossible choice. They could allow Sarah to continue working in an increasingly dangerous situation, hoping that her value to Dr. Whitmore would protect her from harm. Or they could take dramatic action to remove her from Boston entirely, risking community conflict and potentially exposing the very secrets they were trying to protect. Either choice carried enormous risks, but doing nothing guaranteed that Sarah would eventually learn too much to be allowed to survive. As winter progressed into spring, Sarah's expanded responsibilities at the clinic gave her access to information that terrified even her exceptional memory. She began helping Dr. Whitmore maintain detailed records of his patient encounters, including private notes about his decision-making processes and correspondence with colleagues at other medical institutions. What she discovered was evidence of a systematic program that extended far beyond individual cases of infanticide. Dr. Whitmore maintained meticulous records of every Chinese child born with physical abnormalities, categorizing them by severity of defect, family social status, and probability of successful treatment. Children from wealthy merchant families received aggressive treatment regardless of their conditions. Children from poor laborer families were classified as humanitarian terminations, whose deaths were recorded as natural consequences of their birth defects. More disturbing still, Sarah discovered that Dr. Whitmore corresponded regularly with physicians in New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco who were implementing similar programs in their own Chinese communities. The letters, written in medical Latin that Sarah's exceptional linguistic abilities allowed her to understand, described methods for selective intervention in cases of mongoloid genetic deficiency and strategies for avoiding legal complications when facilitating natural selection. Sarah's access to these records revealed that Dr. Whitmore was not acting alone, but as part of a coordinated network of physicians who viewed Chinese immigrants as subjects for eugenic experimentation. The program had academic support from Harvard Medical School professors who were studying racial improvement through selective breeding, and official encouragement from public health officials who viewed Chinese population growth as a threat to American social hygiene. The scope of what Sarah had discovered was beyond anything the community leaders had imagined. Dr. Whitmore's clinic was essentially a research facility where Chinese immigrants were subjected to medical experimentation designed to limit their reproduction and eliminate undesirable genetic traits from their population. The deaths of imperfect babies were not isolated incidents of malpractice, but part of a systematic effort to reshape the genetic profile of Chinese Americans. Sarah's psychological condition, which caused her to involuntarily reveal secrets during casual conversation, made her a walking encyclopedia of information that could destroy careers, expose criminal conspiracies, and potentially save lives by ending the eugenic program. It also made her the most dangerous person in Boston to anyone connected with Dr. Whitmore's network. The crisis reached its breaking point on a warm April evening when Sarah encountered Dr. James Richardson, Dr. Whitmore's colleague from Massachusetts General Hospital, outside the clinic. Dr. Richardson had been involved in several of the consultations that Sarah had translated, and she recognized him immediately. "Dr. Richardson," she said in perfect English, "are you here to discuss more of the Chinese breeding experiments with Dr. Whitmore?" Dr. Richardson stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the small Chinese girl who had just used terminology that should have been incomprehensible to someone of her background. "What did you say, child?" "I translate for Dr. Whitmore when he talks with you about preventing Chinese people from having defective babies. I remember everything you've said about using medical care to improve the Chinese race by letting weak babies die and preventing crippled adults from reproducing. You call it scientific eugenics, but really it's just killing Chinese people you think are worthless." Dr. Richardson felt his world tilting on its axis. The girl's precise use of medical and scientific terminology, combined with her detailed knowledge of confidential discussions, made it clear that she had been present during conversations that could end careers and potentially result in criminal charges if they became public. "Young lady, I think you must be confused about what you've heard. Medical discussions can be difficult for children to understand correctly." "I'm not confused, Dr. Richardson. I remember that you told Dr. Whitmore that Chinese people breed like animals and that American society benefits when natural selection eliminates the weak ones. You said that helping defective Chinese babies die is actually mercy because they would never be accepted in white society anyway. You brought Dr. Whitmore a special medicine from your hospital that stops babies from breathing without leaving marks that coroners can detect." Dr. Richardson realized that Sarah Chen possessed information that could destroy not only his own career, but potentially expose a network of physicians and academics who had been implementing eugenic policies for years. The girl's extraordinary memory had turned her into a living record of conversations and activities that were never supposed to be documented or recalled. That night, Dr. Richardson met with Dr. Whitmore and two other colleagues who had been involved in the eugenic program. The meeting took place at Dr. Whitmore's private residence on Beacon Hill, in a study lined with medical textbooks and anatomical specimens. The discussion was brief and decisive. Sarah Chen had become an existential threat that required immediate elimination. The physicians understood that they could not simply dismiss Sarah from her position without raising suspicions. Her father would demand explanations, and her abrupt departure from the clinic would generate exactly the kind of attention they needed to avoid. More problematically, they had no way of knowing how much information Sarah had already shared with other members of the Chinese community, or whether she had inadvertently revealed their secrets to other English-speaking individuals who might understand the implications. Dr. Whitmore proposed a solution that his colleagues reluctantly accepted. Sarah Chen would die of complications from a medical procedure that she required for a legitimate health condition. Dr. Whitmore would diagnose her with a serious illness that necessitated immediate surgery, perform an operation that resulted in fatal complications, and ensure that her death appeared to be a tragic but unavoidable consequence of her medical condition. The plan was both medically plausible and personally devastating for Dr. Whitmore, who had genuinely grown fond of Sarah's intelligence and linguistic abilities. But the physicians agreed that their scientific work was too important to be destroyed by the accusations of one Chinese child, regardless of how accurate those accusations might be. Sarah Chen's murder was planned with the same clinical precision that Dr. Whitmore applied to his eugenic practices. The physician began by documenting symptoms of a serious abdominal condition that would require emergency surgery. He created medical records showing that Sarah had been suffering from severe stomach pain, nausea, and other symptoms consistent with appendicitis or intestinal obstruction. The records were backdated to suggest that her condition had been developing gradually over several weeks. Dr. Whitmore then approached Li Wei Chen with devastating news about his daughter's health. The doctor explained that Sarah had been hiding symptoms of a serious medical condition because she didn't want to worry her parents or miss work at the clinic. Her condition had now progressed to the point where immediate surgery was necessary to save her life. Without the operation, she would certainly die within days from internal complications. Li Wei was both grateful for Dr. Whitmore's attention to his daughter's health and terrified by the gravity of her condition. The doctor's reputation and his obvious concern for Sarah's welfare made his diagnosis completely credible. When Dr. Whitmore offered to perform the necessary surgery free of charge as a service to a valued member of his clinic staff, Li Wei accepted immediately and gratefully. The surgery was scheduled for a Saturday morning when the clinic would be closed to regular patients, ensuring complete privacy for the procedure. Dr. Whitmore explained that the operation would be delicate and potentially lengthy, but that Sarah's age and general health provided reasons for optimism. He asked Li Wei and Mei Ling to arrive at the clinic early that morning to be with their daughter before the surgery and to provide emotional support during her recovery. Sarah seemed to understand that something terrible was about to happen to her, although she couldn't articulate the source of her premonition. Her behavior during the days leading up to the surgery became increasingly erratic and disturbing. She spoke frequently about death and dying, asked her parents detailed questions about what would happen to her body after she died, and spent hours staring at the harbor as if she were trying to memorize its appearance. Most troubling of all, Sarah began speaking about Dr. Whitmore's secrets in a compulsive, unstoppable stream that suggested her psychological barriers were completely breaking down. She told her parents about the babies who had been killed, the correspondence with other physicians, the experiments being conducted on Chinese patients, and the academic research that justified treating Chinese people as laboratory subjects for genetic improvement. Li Wei and Mei Ling dismissed their daughter's disturbing revelations as fever-induced hallucinations caused by her illness. They assumed that the stress of her medical condition was causing her to confuse fragments of translation work with imaginary scenarios of medical malpractice. The idea that Dr. Whitmore, who was about to operate on their daughter to save her life, could be responsible for the systematic murder of Chinese children seemed impossible to believe. Saturday morning arrived with spring sunshine that made Boston Harbor sparkle like scattered diamonds. Li Wei and Mei Ling brought Sarah to the clinic early, carrying a small bag of her favorite foods and a jade bracelet that had belonged to Mei Ling's mother. They expected to spend the day at the clinic, waiting anxiously during surgery and then helping Sarah recover from what they hoped would be a successful operation. Dr. Whitmore greeted the family with apparent warmth and concern, explaining the surgical procedure in terms that Li Wei and Mei Ling could understand. He assured them that while the operation was serious, Sarah's youth and strength gave her excellent chances for complete recovery. He asked them to wait in the clinic's reception area while he prepared Sarah for surgery, promising to update them regularly on her progress. What happened in that operating room was witnessed only by Dr. Whitmore and Sarah herself, but the girl's final words were heard by several people who happened to be on the street outside the clinic. As Dr. Whitmore began the procedure, Sarah started speaking in a clear, carrying voice that penetrated the building's walls and reached the ears of early morning pedestrians. Dr. Whitmore kills Chinese babies because he thinks we're not real Americans, Sarah's voice carried through the spring air. He keeps bottles of medicine that stop hearts without leaving marks. He writes letters to doctors in other cities about how many Chinese children he's helped die. He tells the Harvard professors that Chinese people are like weeds that need to be pulled before they spread too much. Dr. Whitmore tried to silence her, but Sarah's voice grew stronger and more desperate as she realized what was happening to her. He's going to kill me now because I know about the experiments. He's going to cut me open and make it look like surgery, but really he's going to murder me just like he murdered all the babies with cleft lips and twisted feet and weak hearts. The people gathering on the street outside could hear Sarah's accusations clearly, and several recognized her voice from her work in the community. Mrs. Wang, who happened to be walking to the morning market, stopped dead when she heard the familiar sound of the young translator's voice coming from the clinic. Mr. Liu, who had been heading to his shop early to receive a shipment from China, paused outside the clinic door as Sarah's desperate words reached his ears. "Please don't kill me, Dr. Whitmore." Sarah's voice was becoming weaker but remained audible. "I promise I won't tell anyone else about the dead babies. I promise I'll forget everything I heard about the breeding experiments. Please let me live so I can take care of my parents when they get old." The crowd outside the clinic was growing larger as Sarah's pleas attracted more attention. Chinese immigrants who recognized her voice began gathering, while Irish and Italian residents from neighboring streets came to investigate the source of the disturbing sounds. Someone ran to fetch the police, while others pounded on the clinic door demanding to be let inside. Dr. Whitmore realized that his carefully planned procedure had become a public spectacle that would inevitably result in investigation and exposure. Sarah's final testimony was being heard by dozens of witnesses, and her specific knowledge of his activities was creating exactly the kind of attention he had hoped to avoid. But he had gone too far to stop the procedure without raising even more suspicion about his intentions. Sarah Chen died on Dr. Whitmore's operating table as the sound of angry voices and pounding fists echoed through the clinic walls. Her final words, spoken in both English and Cantonese, were a complete recitation of every crime she had witnessed, every conversation she had overheard, and every detail she remembered about the systematic murder of Chinese children in Boston. The crowd outside the clinic heard enough of her testimony to understand that she was accusing the city's most respected advocate for Chinese immigrants of being their most dangerous enemy. When police finally forced their way into the clinic, they found Dr. Whitmore standing over Sarah's body, his surgical instruments laid out as if he had been performing a legitimate operation. He calmly explained that the girl had suffered fatal complications during emergency surgery for intestinal obstruction, and that her dying words had been fever-induced hallucinations caused by the trauma of her medical condition. But the testimony of the witnesses outside the clinic told a very different story. More than 30 people had heard Sarah's accusations, and several community leaders could corroborate her claims with their own observations and investigations. Mrs. Wang described her previous conversations with Sarah about infanticide. Mr. Liu recounted his meeting with the Community Leadership Council and their decision to investigate Dr. Whitmore's practices. Chen Ming Wang presented the results of his research into suspicious infant deaths at the clinic. The police investigation that followed Sarah's death would become one of the most controversial criminal cases in Boston's history. Detective Captain Patrick Murphy, who had been investigating crimes in the immigrant communities for 15 years, found himself confronting evidence of medical malpractice on a scale that challenged his understanding of professional criminality. Sarah's dying testimony, corroborated by physical evidence and witness statements, revealed a network of physicians who had been systematically eliminating Chinese children they deemed genetically inferior. The investigation uncovered Dr. Whitmore's correspondence with colleagues in other cities, revealing that the eugenic program in Boston was part of a coordinated national effort to limit Chinese immigration through selective medical intervention. Letters between physicians discussed methods for facilitating natural selection and strategies for avoiding legal consequences when implementing humanitarian terminations of defective Chinese children. The basement of Dr. Whitmore's clinic, when thoroughly searched by police, yielded horrifying evidence that corroborated Sarah's claims. Investigators found detailed records of every Chinese child born with birth defects over the past 3 years, including photographs, medical assessments, and decisions about treatment or termination. They discovered bottles of medications that could cause cardiac arrest without leaving detectable traces, surgical instruments designed for procedures that were never recorded in official medical records, and correspondence with academic researchers who were studying methods for improving racial characteristics through selective breeding. Most damning of all, investigators found Sarah's own medical records, created by Dr. Whitmore in the days before her death, which documented symptoms she had never exhibited and justified a surgical procedure she had never needed. The fabricated medical history proved that Dr. Whitmore had murdered Sarah to prevent her from exposing his crimes, using his medical expertise to create a plausible cover story for her elimination. Dr. Whitmore was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, including the deaths of Sarah Chen and 12 Chinese infants whose deaths had been reclassified as homicides based on evidence uncovered during the investigation. The trial became a sensation that exposed the extent of eugenic practices in American medicine and forever changed how immigrant communities viewed the healthcare system. The physician's defense was that he had been conducting legitimate medical research designed to improve public health outcomes for Chinese immigrants. His lawyers argued that his decisions about treatment priorities were based on scientific assessment of patients' prospects for survival and meaningful life in American society. They portrayed him as a dedicated doctor who had made difficult but necessary choices about allocating limited medical resources to patients who could benefit most from intervention. The prosecution, led by District Attorney William Harper, presented Sarah Chen's testimony as recorded by witnesses outside the clinic on the morning of her death. Harper argued that Dr. Whitmore had systematically murdered Chinese children based on eugenic theories that classified them as genetically inferior and socially undesirable. The state's case relied heavily on the detailed records Dr. Whitmore had kept of his decision-making processes, which revealed his belief that Chinese immigrants posed a threat to American genetic integrity that justified medical intervention to limit their reproduction. The trial lasted 6 weeks and attracted national attention as the first criminal prosecution of physicians for implementing eugenic policies. Witnesses included Chinese immigrants who testified about the loss of their children, medical colleagues who described Dr. Whitmore's academic research into racial improvement, and experts who explained the scientific invalidity of eugenic theories. The most powerful testimony came from Li Wei and Mei Ling Chen, who described their daughter's extraordinary memory and her growing distress as she accumulated knowledge of Dr. Whitmore's crimes. Dr. Whitmore was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death by electrocution. His execution in 1892 marked the end of organized eugenic practices in Boston's Chinese community, but it also revealed the extent to which such policies had been implemented in immigrant communities across the United States. The case prompted investigations in other cities that uncovered similar networks of physicians who had been eliminating children they deemed genetically unfit for American society. The legacy of Sarah Chen's sacrifice extended far beyond the prosecution of her murderer. Her story became a rallying cry for Chinese immigrants who had been subjected to discriminatory medical practices, and it led to reforms in how health care was provided to minority communities. The Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association of Boston, established in the aftermath of the case, created independent medical facilities staffed by Chinese physicians who could provide culturally appropriate care without the threat of eugenic intervention. The case also had lasting effects on American medical education and practice. Medical schools began requiring courses in medical ethics that specifically addressed the treatment of minority patients, and professional medical organizations established oversight mechanisms to prevent the implementation of eugenic policies by individual physicians. The Chen Protocols, named in Sarah's honor, became standard procedures for ensuring that medical decisions about minority patients were based on legitimate clinical considerations rather than racial or social prejudices. Li Wei Chen never recovered from the loss of his daughter, but he dedicated the remainder of his life to ensuring that her story was preserved and that her sacrifice led to meaningful change. He worked with journalists and historians to document the details of Dr. Whitmore's crimes and the broader eugenic movement that had targeted Chinese immigrants. His memoir, published in both Chinese and English, became required reading in medical schools and law schools as an example of how prejudice could corrupt professional practice. Mei Ling Chen, devastated by grief and guilt over her failure to understand the danger her daughter faced, returned to China where she spent her final years caring for elderly relatives and sharing Sarah's story with Chinese communities that were considering immigration to America. Her letters, preserved in the archives of the Chinese Historical Society of America, provide a mother's perspective on the loss of a child whose extraordinary gifts made her both invaluable and vulnerable. The street outside Dr. Whitmore's former clinic became an unofficial memorial to Sarah Chen and the other children who died as victims of eugenic medicine. Chinese families would bring flowers and burn incense at the location where Sarah's final testimony was heard, creating a tradition that continued for decades. The site eventually became the location of the Sarah Chen Memorial Health Center, a community-owned medical facility that provides culturally appropriate health care to immigrant families. Detective Captain Murphy, who had led the investigation into Sarah's death, wrote in his retirement memoirs that the case had fundamentally changed his understanding of how prejudice could manifest in apparently respectable institutions. The Chen case taught him that the most dangerous criminals were often those who held positions of trust and authority in their communities, and that the most vulnerable victims were often those whose outsider status made their disappearance unlikely to attract official attention. The case files from Sarah Chen's investigation were preserved in the Boston Police Department archives, where they served as a resource for investigators working on similar cases in other jurisdictions. The detailed documentation of Dr. Whitmore's methods and motivations became a template for recognizing and investigating medical crimes targeting minority communities, and the case was cited in dozens of subsequent prosecutions of healthcare professionals who had abused their positions to harm vulnerable patients. Modern scholars who have studied the Chen case note that Sarah's extraordinary memory made her uniquely capable of exposing crimes that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. Her ability to retain and recall detailed conversations allowed her to serve as a living archive of evidence that could not be destroyed or suppressed by the criminals she exposed. At the same time, her psychological condition, which caused her to involuntarily reveal secrets during casual conversation, made her inevitable discovery and elimination a tragic certainty. The tragedy of Sarah Chen reminds us that knowledge can be both a gift and a curse, and that the most vulnerable members of society often possess information that powerful people will kill to protect. Her story demonstrates how quickly innocence can become dangerous when it threatens the secrets that evil people will do anything to conceal, and how the pursuit of scientific progress can become corrupted when it is guided by prejudice rather than genuine concern for human welfare. Sarah's memory, which should have been treasured as an extraordinary gift, became the instrument of her destruction. But her courage in speaking truth, even when she knew it would cost her everything, helped expose a network of criminals who might otherwise have continued their predatory behavior indefinitely. She died as a child, but her testimony lived on to protect countless other children who might have become victims of the same eugenic policies that claimed her life. If you found this story as compelling and disturbing as we did, share it with someone who appreciates historical mysteries that reveal uncomfortable truths about our past. Hit that like button to support our research into these forgotten cases, and subscribe for more stories about the brave individuals who sacrificed everything to expose dangerous secrets. What aspects of Sarah's story do you find most troubling? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and join us next time for another tale of courage, corruption, and the deadly price of truth.